On a cold, dark, rainy December 26, Major General William Tecumseh Sherman unloads his troops at Chickasaw Bayou, just a few miles north of the troublesome town of Vicksburg. Facing them is a rebel force barely a tenth their size. With a great disparity in numbers, both sides expect a quick, decisive battle that will decide the fate of the Gibraltar of the Confederacy. Yet, as both sides ready themselves for the coming conflict, another battle is being waged 40 miles to the east in Jackson, a fight not for land, but for hearts and minds. President Jefferson Davis, standing in front of a packed crowd in the Mississippi state capitol, knows that the words he chooses will determine how resolved his fellow Mississippians will be in facing the coming storm. Once the president is ready, he unleashes his fiery oration. You in Mississippi have but little experience as yet the horrors of war. You have seen but little of the savage manner in which it was waged by your barbarous enemies. But now, your soil is invaded, your cities menaced, immense navies have been constructed, vast armies have been accumulated for the purpose of crushing out the rebellion. The issue before us is one of no ordinary character. Will you be slaves or will you be independent? I feel that in addressing Mississippians, the answer will be that their interest, even life itself, should be willingly laid down on the altar of their country. With Vicksburg threatened once again, I have perfect confidence that with your assistance and support, our brave sons will drive the enemy from the soil of Mississippi. Regardless of all the large-scale movements across the country in the fall of 1862, Vicksburg has enjoyed some relative peace and quiet since Flag Officer David G. Farragut's failed investment of the town on July 4th. Unsuccessful in his attempt to build a canal to bypass the city, while also being unable to blockade the land routes, Farragut had no chance of neutralizing the Gibraltar of the Confederacy. Upon hearing of Farragut's failure to take Vicksburg, Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles regretfully wrote, "A year's delay, with much national depression and great loss to the country, was the consequence." Secretary Welles, the main driver behind General Winfield Scott's Anaconda Plan, sees the capture of the Mississippi River as the last goal in effectively crippling the Confederacy. But until the Confederate bastions of Vicksburg and its newly established sister, Port Hudson, are taken, the Mississippi River will be closed to Union navigation and the all-important grain shipments from the Old Northwest. Not only are the farmers furious that their shipping lanes are blocked, but many are aghast at the president for turning this war into a crusade to abolish slavery. If the river is not reopened soon, there are rumors that the northwestern states may secede and form an alliance with the Southern Confederacy. This vital section remains the last link the Confederacy has with its western states. As long as it stays open, desperately needed men and material can easily cross the river. President Jefferson Davis, who owns a plantation near the Bluff City, declares that Vicksburg is the nailhead that holds the South's two halves together. Seeing how important Vicksburg is to both sides, both the Union and the Confederacy are ramping up their efforts to control the vital city. As the Federals progress deeper into the South, the Confederates will spend more time bolstering Vicksburg's defenses for an attack that is surely to come. Although Farragut can blame his failure on the diseases prevalent in that swampy region of the United States and the ineffective cooperation between the armed forces, ultimately, he failed to overcome Vicksburg's greatest strength, its daunting geography. Founded atop a bluff overlooking the horseshoe-shaped bend in the Mississippi, the city is almost impossible to approach by river, while on land it's not much easier. To the north lies the Mississippi Delta, an area 200 miles long and 50 miles wide, characterized by intersecting waterways that restrict large-scale movements. To the east and south are dozens of rivers and swamps that the defenders can utilize in their defense. All these rivers funnel any attacking force down the Southern Railroad of Mississippi from Jackson. Whoever desires to take this impregnable fortress will have to overcome its formidable terrain. This will require a much larger army to move overland and invest the town from the landward side. Yet, since the start of the war, the largest roadblock in preventing a federal army from investing the town is the various Confederate forces operating in northern Mississippi. Since the start of 1862, the rebels have managed to stall the Federals from advancing deeper into Mississippi despite their constant losses. After the fall of Corinth back in May, Major General Ulysses S. Grant, commander of the Department of Tennessee, was ordered by Major General Henry W. Halleck to remain on the defensive. Yet, the situation changed after the crushing defeat of Major General Earl Van Dorn at the Second Battle of Corinth in early October. Van Dorn, hoping to push Grant and Rosecrans out of his home state, vigorously attacked the Federal defenders garrisoning Vital Rail Junction. But after 2 days of hot, desperate fighting, the Federals came out victorious. The defeat was so complete that Van Dorn was not only forced to give up his desires of liberating Western Tennessee, but he was also replaced as the overall commander of the rebel forces in the state. With the Confederate momentum played out and no roaming rebel forces keeping him on the defensive, Grant starts eyeing his next target. On October 26, Grant proposes to Halleck an overland drive towards Vicksburg to take the annoying city once and for all. The general plans to concentrate his scattered forces at Grand Junction and follow the Mississippi Central Railroad south to Jackson. As Grant moves along the railroad, his second, Major General William T. Sherman, starting in Memphis, will move down the Mississippi and Tennessee Railroad. While Grant and Sherman march south, Major General Nathaniel P. Banks, who has succeeded Butler in Louisiana, will march north from New Orleans to strike Port Hudson. With three large forces moving in concert, the Confederates will be unable to stop their advance. Once the Confederates are routed, they will link up at Jackson and then move together against Vicksburg. To supply his forces, Grant will rely solely upon the Mississippi Central Railroad. Despite depending on a single track to supply his army, Grant deems it adequate. The next day, Grant receives approval from Halleck and starts organizing his forces. If all goes to plan, the taking of Vicksburg will be the climactic end to the campaign Grant started in Cairo almost a year prior. Following the passing of General Orders No. 168 in October, the 60,000-strong Army of the Tennessee under Grant now becomes the 13th Corps. But due to its massive size, Grant subdivides the Corps into wings. Sherman, in command of roughly 20,000 men, will lead one wing of the army, while Grant, leading the other wing, will command the rest, around 40,000. Major General William S. Rosecrans, who has been under Grant's command since the fall of Corinth in May, has been transferred east to take over command of Buell's Army of the Ohio in Kentucky. This rapid promotion, especially as a new campaign neared, is due to the nasty relationship that developed between the two generals after Rosecrans' impressive victory at Second Corinth, as both generals became increasingly irate with each other, and at times even unable to communicate professionally. Now, with the annoying Rosecrans out of the way, and about to unleash his restless men upon the Confederates in Mississippi, Grant could not feel happier. Yet, just as Grant got rid of one problem, another arose. Another Illinois general is pressing Washington for his own attack against the river citadel. While Halleck authorizes Grant to move against Vicksburg, Lincoln and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, desperate to appease Democrats who are angry over the president's preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, jumps at Major General John A. McClernand's private proposal to take Vicksburg from the river. McClernand, a war Democrat and a staunch Unionist with many friends in the Old Northwest, is an ideal candidate to help Lincoln achieve his political goals of reopening the mighty Mississippi and uniting the country behind his proclamation. Enthusiastic about the proposal, Lincoln gives McClernand separate orders to raise troops from the western states, merge them with the forces at Memphis, and use that force to strike Vicksburg. All the while, Halleck reassures Grant that he will continue to have command of all the troops in his departments. But, On November 14th, when Grant gets word that McClernand is forming a rival expedition, he rushes his preparations to ensure he'll be the only commander who receives glory for taking the annoying fortress. Facing Grant is the army that Rosecrans shredded at Corinth. Demoralized after their loss, the Confederates are now forced on the defensive. With rumors that the victor of Fort Donelson and Shiloh is gearing up to move south, these Southerners know they will have a fight on their hands. To make matters worse, the man taking over the defense of Mississippi is Lieutenant General John C. Pemberton. A Northerner by birth, 49-year-old Pemberton is a puzzling choice to take over the command of such an important position. Though he was born in Pennsylvania, Pemberton married a woman from Virginia. When the Civil War broke out, Pemberton was torn between choosing his northern family and his southern wife. Despite pleas from his family to stay loyal, when Virginia seceded, so did Pemberton. Though described as loyal and competent, Pemberton has a knack for being cautious and painfully indecisive, a trait that has often led him to be hesitant in the face of opposition. After graduating from West Point and garnering a solid record as a staff officer during the Mexican-American War, Pemberton saw little combat in the first year of the Civil War as he was sent to defend South Carolina's coast. Due to his abrasive personality, he fought more with Governor Pickens than the Federals. Davis, admiring his character and feeling like he was treated badly, decided to reassign him to a new position. Thus, in early October, Pemberton assumed command of the Department of Mississippi in eastern Louisiana. When the Confederates in Mississippi hear that Pemberton is taking over, they are surprised, as many thought the illustrious General Joseph E. Johnston is heading west to become their new commander. Yet, to their dismay, the now recovered Johnston only arrived to take over the Department of the West, which had been vacant since Beauregard's removal back in May. One soldier in Van Dorn's army wrote, "Pemberton is the most insignificant puke I ever saw, and will be very unpopular as soon as he is known. His head cannot contain sense enough to command a regiment, much less a corps." Now, with the Confederates back on the defensive, it is up to Johnston to coordinate the Southern armies to face off against a renewed aggression from the Federals. If Johnston desires to save Vicksburg from capture, he would have to conjure up a substantial force to repel Grant. But, due to the confusing chain of command, Johnston has only the authority to order Bragg and Pemberton around, as his jurisdiction only stretches as far as the Mississippi River. Thus, Johnston has no real authority over Holmes, who controls the Trans-Mississippi Department and a large section of unused troops. Upon hearing that Grant will soon be moving south, Pemberton's first move is to withdraw Van Dorn's 24,000-man force from his base at Holly Springs south to the Tallahatchie River to make their stand, while also requesting Davis to order Bragg and Holmes to send reinforcements. Regardless of the impending threat building in northern Mississippi, the reluctant Bragg sends nothing more than an infantry division under Stevenson and a cavalry brigade under Forrest, while Holmes refuses to send anything at all. Bewildered, Pemberton is forced to face Grant at a severe disadvantage. Though Pemberton might be outnumbered in Mississippi, his troops are ready, willing, and able to take the fight to the Federals, especially the recently paroled Fort Donelson prisoners who had been locked away for the past 6 months. Now, back on Southern soil, they are more than eager to get their revenge against those who had held them captive. With the daunting Mississippi geography on their side, they will utilize every river to make any invasion of the state as difficult as possible. On November 28, 1862, Grant, with his preparations to march on Vicksburg complete, orders his men south. Unlike the Eastern soldiers in the Army of the Potomac, who display a sense of professionalism, Grant's Army of the Tennessee resembles more of a ragged bunch of frontiersmen, a rough and rowdy crew. Regardless of their less than stellar appearance, there is one thing Grant's Westerners can claim over their more esteemed brethren in the East: their unfamiliarity with defeat. Since their signal days back in Cairo, Grant's army has not been routed from the field. Expecting victory to come swiftly, Grant's soldiers rapidly marched south, reaching Holly Springs that night as Sherman's men neared Tallahatchie. As the Federals marched deeper into Mississippi, A new, darker type of war is developing on the front lines. Since the start of the war, Unionists were under the impression they were saving the country from being torn apart, and thus were willing to be cordial with rebel sympathizers, even the hated planter elite who owned hundreds of slaves. However, once they see with their own eyes the horrors of slavery in the Deep South, and with the announcement of the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, the Federal soldiers, even the ones who are not fervent abolitionists, develop an unrelenting hatred of the South. Once set in motion against Vicksburg, Grant's soldiers will unleash their fury upon any plantation they come across. They plunder buildings, steal livestock, free slaves, and burn plantation houses. Witnessing the soldiers enact their anger upon Southern property, Sherman writes, "The new troops come full of the idea of a more vigorous prosecution of the war, meaning the destruction and plunder. Planters who can leave in time move their slaves to Texas to get out of the way of the Grant's vandals." Infuriated with the vandalism, Grant tries to reprimand those guilty of wanton destruction, but the threat of punishment is not enough to curtail their activities. Worried about being outflanked by Sherman's force approaching from the west, Pemberton orders Van Dorn to abandon his highly defensible Tallahatchie line and withdraw back to Grenada. The rebel army, suffering immensely from a lack of shoes and no tents, struggles to stay warm in the rain, sleet, and snow of early December. Despite their deplorable state, they trudge on, hoping to overcome the invading Yankees. Rationalizing the resolve to win, Private W.R. Rohr writes, "I cannot think life desirable with such masters as the Yankees will make." On December 5th, as the two wings of the army near Oxford, Grant receives a telegram from Halleck that will change the entire course of his invasion. Halleck recommends that Grant hold his position and send a force down the Mississippi to take the lightly defended Vicksburg by river. Halleck also hints that a presidential-sanctioned expedition is soon to take off from Memphis. Grant, where the roads turning into an unpassable quagmire, and certain that McClernand will be leading the expedition, agrees to change course. With Pemberton's smaller force anxiously waiting Grenada for his next move, and the Vicksburg garrison barely large enough to keep the Federal gunboats away, Grant realizes that the Gibraltar of the Confederacy is ripe for the taking. On December 8th, Grant, wanting to beat McClernand to the punch, urgently sends Sherman back to Memphis to take over his expedition of Vicksburg while he keeps Pemberton distracted in central Mississippi. If all goes to plan, Vicksburg will be taken and the Confederacy will be cut in two by Christmas. On December 12th, Sherman reaches Memphis and meets with Rear Admiral David D. Porter, who will be leading the gunboat contingent. Altogether, Sherman and Porter will have a combined force of 7 gunboats, 59 troop transports, and 20,000 men for their expedition. This force alone will be able to easily overcome the small Vicksburg garrison. With this force, Grant intends for Sherman and Porter to move down the Mississippi until they reach the Yazoo River. Once here, they'll move up the Yazoo to bypass the Vicksburg batteries to ensure Sherman has an easy route to the town. Sherman, writing to his wife Ellen about his upcoming expedition, says, "My part is exactly what I've chose. Opening this great artery of America is all my ambition." But as Grant pushes further south, he becomes embroiled with Jewish cotton speculators. Believing these men are following his army to purchase cotton to support the Confederate war effort, the general loses his temper and issues General Orders No. 11, which expels all the Jews from his department on December 17th. Those who refuse to leave will be arrested and imprisoned. Rawlins, Grant's adjutant, pleads with him not to issue the order, but he does so anyway. The order only stays in effect for 4 days until Lincoln gets wind of it after Jewish groups descend upon the White House to complain. On December 18th, realizing that Grant's Army of the Tennessee is too large to be contained in a single corps, Halleck informs his aggressive general to reorganize the army into 4 corps. Thus, Grant reshuffles his forces and reluctantly assigns McClernand as a commander of the 13th Corps. Sherman is given command of the 15th Corps, but will not receive this information until returns from his expedition. Major General Stephen A. Hurlbut, one of the generals who held the Hornet's Nest at Shiloh, is given command of the 16th Corps. And finally, Major General James B. McPherson, a promising engineer and personal friend of Grant, takes command of the 17th Corps. While Grant is reforming the Army of the Tennessee, McClernand is stuck in Illinois raising troops. McClernand, curious about why he's not been ordered to Memphis yet, writes to Stanton concerning his upcoming operation. Wiring back, Stanton tells McClernand, "I had supposed that you had received your orders from the General-in-Chief." Taken aback, McClernand soon gets word from his allies in Memphis, who are watching in horror as Sherman makes preparations without him. Realizing he has been subverted by Grant and Halleck, a livid McClernand begs Washington to let him move to the fronts. As Sherman gathers his forces in Memphis and McClernand frets over the loss of his expedition, Grant slowly applies pressure against Pemberton at Grenada. However, this slow advance is unnerving for a general who likes quick and bold moves. Whatever the case, the Army of the Tennessee steadily moves south. On December 19th, as he moves deeper into Confederate territory, Grant becomes more worried about a single supply line. Writing to his sister Mary, Grant tells her, "I'm extended now like a peninsula into an enemy's country, without a large army depending for their daily bread upon keeping open the line of railroad running 190 miles. As Grant moves deeper into Mississippi, the Confederates realize he is relying solely upon the Mississippi Central Railroad to supply his forces. Seeing the potential of cutting supply line, Pemberton orders Van Dorn to take a crack force and see what he can do. On December 16th, Van Dorn leaves Grenada with a reliable force of 6,000 troopers and rides north. Swinging around Grant's force at Oxford, Van Dorn evades Federal patrols sent to intercept him. After 4 days of hard riding, Van Dorn and his troopers thunder into Holly Springs on the morning of December 20th. Catching the Federal defenders completely by surprise, the rebel troopers capture and parole the entire garrison, around 1,500 men. With the Federals taken care of, Van Dorn's troopers get to work looting and burning the depot. Riding after the raid, J.D. Dupree said, "Van Dorn's troopers are the best equipped body of cavalry in the Confederate service. Every trooper had from 2 to 6 pistols, 1 or more carbines, 1 or more sabers, and all the ammunition, rations, blankets, shirts, hats, boots, overcoats, etc. his horse could carry." Once done with Holly Springs, Van Dorn moves north, tearing up as much track as possible. In a single raid, Van Dorn has rid himself of the stigma that was the disastrous defeat of 2nd Corinth. As Van Dorn rampages throughout northern Mississippi, Forrest tears up the tracks in western Tennessee, destroying all the lines between Jackson, Tennessee and Columbus, Kentucky. The twin raids by Forrest and Van Dorn render Grant effectively isolated in Oxford, with the telegraph lines destroyed, rails torn up, and stores burnt down. Grant's hopeful campaign has come to a grinding halt. Realizing he will not be able to continue his drive to Vicksburg, Grant calls off his advance and withdraws north on the 21st. While the Army of the Tennessee marches back north, Grant orders his soldiers to forage out the countryside to sustain themselves until they reach Union lines. Despite a lack of a supply line, Grant witnesses the success his men have in living out the rebel countryside, giving him ideas for his next advance against Vicksburg. After 4 days of retreating through muddy roads and freezing rain, Grant's frostbitten soldiers reached the haven of Holly Springs on Christmas Eve. Even though Grant's march to Vicksburg started with high hopes, the campaign ended in tragedy. The Confederates, on the other hand, are elated at the fact that Grant has been forced to retreat, despite their inability to check his advance. President Davis, who's torn the Confederacy, arrives to confer with Pemberton. While talking with his generals and inspiring confidence in his soldiers, alarming reports arrive from Vicksburg. Federal gunboats and troop transports chock full of men have been spotted entering the Yazoo River. The rumored Mississippi expedition has been sighted, and it's looking to bypass the formidable river defenses. The same day Van Dorn strikes Holly Springs, Sherman and Porter embark on their expedition to Vicksburg. Traveling south, they pick up Brigadier General Frederick Steele's 13,000-man division at Helena, increasing Sherman's total strength to 33,000 men. This size will give Sherman a 3-to-1 advantage over Smith's 12,000-strong Vicksburg garrison. Expecting Grant to keep the pressure up against Pemberton's main army at Grenada, Sherman believes he will easily catch the defenders by surprise and swiftly take Vicksburg from underneath Pemberton's thumb. Writing to his subordinates, Sherman declares, "To take Vicksburg will be a severe blow, and if done effectually, will probably be the most decisive act of the war." By Christmas Eve, Sherman's expedition is just north of the entrance to the Yazoo River. Unlike their commanders, the troops have no idea where they are headed. Yet, despite their lack of knowledge, they celebrate the coming of Christmas while crammed aboard their transports. Meanwhile, in Grenada, Pemberton gets alarming reports that a Federal expedition is near Vicksburg. With that information, Pemberton sends 2 brigades to bolster the town. Expecting Sherman's force to land at Walnut Hills, Smith taps Brigadier General Stephen D. Lee, the artillerist who masterfully defended Dunkirk Church at Antietam, to command the Confederate defenses. On Christmas, Lee moves his men to Walnut Hills, where they erect their defenses facing Chickasaw Bayou. As the Confederates wait for Sherman to make his move, 40 miles to the east in Jackson, President Jefferson Davis and General Joseph E. Johnston stand before a packed crowd in the Capitol building. With his home state under attack by Federal forces, Davis delivers a passionate speech to encourage his fellow Mississippians to defend their state from the northern invaders. "Let, then, all who have at heart the safety of the country go without delay to Vicksburg and Port Hudson. Let them go such length of time as they can spare, for 30, for 60, or for 90 days. Let them assist in preserving the Mississippi River, that great artery of the country, and thus conduce more than any other way to the perpetuation of the Confederacy and the success of the cause." After wasting away Christmas running fool's errands for Halleck, Sherman orders his forces to move upon Walnut Hills. After clearing the torpedoes placed in the water, Sherman lands his divisions at Johnson's plantation. For the next 3 days, Sherman's men probe the Confederate defenses but fail to find anything usable. The flanks prove impassable, and the gunboats fail to dislodge the stubborn rebels. By the evening of the 28th, Sherman is desperate to end the stalemate and take Vicksburg. The only avenue left for his troops to make is a head-on charge against the rebel entrenchments. As the morning breaks on December 29th, 1862, Sherman's men form 3 columns in anticipation of their attack. On the right stands Brigadier General Andrew J. Smith's 1st Division. In the middle, facing the Indian Mound, is Brigadier General David Stewart's 2nd Division. On the left is Brigadier General George W. Morgan's 3rd Division, whom Sherman tapped to make the main assault. Finally, backing up Morgan is Brigadier General Frederick Still's 4th Division. Forming up his divisions into columns of attack, Sherman expects to break through Lee's entrenchments, relying solely upon his overwhelming numbers. If all goes to plan, the Stars and Stripes will be flying over the Warren County Courthouse by the new year. At 7 a.m., the artillery opens up upon the rebels, who return in kind. Facing such a daunting task, Sherman knows that many lives will be lost in the assault. Even if they manage to cut their way through the thick undergrowth and take the first line, they will face reinforcements that are surely expected to arrive. With supplies running low, the Federals have only one good assault in them. If Sherman expects to reach Vicksburg, everything depends on Morgan's men quickly taking the heights. The position Lee chooses to defend proves to be an advantageous one for the rebels. Fronting the Confederate position is Chickasaw Bayou, which creates a natural moat that will impede any attacking force. Along with the bayou, the unforgiving terrain of thickets and swamps essentially funnels the attackers to make head-on assaults. With artillery at the crest of the hill and the Confederate entrenchments below, molded together with the difficult terrain, the defenders have turned the approaches into a killing field. As the Federals await the designated signal, the men's faces turn completely pale as they stare motionless at the heights they'll soon be ordered to take. Then, as the clock strikes 11 a.m., the Federal cannonade is sent off, announcing Sherman's attack at Chickasaw Bayou. On the western side, A.J. Smith's division advances forward, but due to the impenetrable terrain, does little more than trade shots with Confederate defenders. To the east, Stewart's division is forced across the bayou to make their attack. Leading the division is G.A. Smith's Missouri Brigade. Once Smith's men begin fording the bayou, their ranks are rapidly thinned by the defending rebels. Those who luckily survive the ordeal cower behind the levee. With so much lead in the air, the Missourians refuse to leave their cover. Regardless of how little success the two western divisions have achieved, Sherman is depending on the divisions of Morgan and Steele to win the day. In front of Morgan's division is DeCourcy's brigade of Eastern veterans. But just as they're about to launch their attack, word gets back that the pontoon bridges that had been ordered to be placed are having problems. Refusing to let the pontoons stop the assault, Sherman sends a courier to Morgan ordering the attack. Tell Morgan to give the signal for the assault. We will lose 5,000 men before we take Vicksburg, and may as well lose them here as anywhere else. DeCourcy, leading his brigade, sends his men right through the bayou, exactly where the Confederates wanted them to go. Waist deep in the muck and unable to find cover, they're hit by a wall of lead. DeCourcy, writing about the assault, said that, "When the enemy increased his fire of small arms and grape to such a degree as to render a farther advance impossible. Scared, DeCourcy's Easterners retreat to the rear. Unable to get his men to return, DeCourcy relents and lets his men shelter from the battle." Watching the attack from the west, a Georgian declared that, "The dreadful sheets of fire from the infantry and artillery, the iron hail annihilating the leading ranks and compelling them to fall back in confusion and disorder." Wanting to take some fire off of DeCourcy, Morgan sends the fallen brigades of Lindsey and Sheldon to his right, in the gap between the divisions. During this movement, problems start to arise in the Federal command. While the rest of Morgan's division follows right, Sherman wanted Steele's division to form on the left, but Thayer instructed his units to follow their allies in the front. Thus, instead of moving left as they had been ordered, they ended up on Morgan's right, effectively removing Thayer's brigade from the battle. Despite the screw-up, Steele has more brigades to send into the fray. Brigadier General Frank Blair Jr., the son of the founder of the Republican Party, Frank Blair Sr., leads his Missouri brigade into the mud. Yet, as they approach the rebel entrenchments, they find the route very troublesome, as they have to travel over a thick quagmire. Once in the middle of the bayou, Blair's muddy men find themselves riddled with rebel bullets. However, regardless of how hard they try to break through, Blair's men barely scratch the rebel entrenchments. Blair, seeing no point in continuing the charge, recalls his men. Writing after the battle, Blair admitted that it is useless to apply words to eulogize the heroism of those who thus shed their blood for their country. The 26th Louisiana, facing Blair's men, is shocked by the carnage they had inflicted and surprisingly holds their fire to allow Blair's brave men to retreat to safety. In his short, bloody assault, Blair lost over 645 men, the most for any brigade at the battle. Frank Wilkie, a writer witnessing the assault, wrote that Blair's assault is one of the most desperate and gallant feats recorded in history. As the sun begins to dip, Sherman realizes there is no way he'll be able to break through Lee's stout entrenchments in time and thus orders the assaults to cease. Hovey's Missourians, next in line to attack after Blair, are about to begin their assault when orders come back to halt them in their tracks. Many of Hovey's men, who watched as their fellow countrymen get mowed down, breathe a sigh of relief. Watching the Federals retreat from the front, the relieved rebels let off a shout of victory all along the line. Sherman, though saddened by the loss, is satisfied with how his men performed in their assault. Hoping to turn this into eventual success, Sherman plans a combined Army-Navy flank to uproot the defenders at Haynes Bluff. Yet, when he is about to execute this move, the weather refuses to cooperate. After 2 days of waiting, Sherman frustratingly calls off the movement on New Year's Day, 1863. The Battle of Chickasaw Bayou is a lopsided victory for Pemberton and his Vicksburg defenders. In his uncoordinated attacks, Sherman loses 6% of his force, while the Confederates lose merely 3%. Though hastily built, the rebel entrenchments, backed by artillery, were well sighted by Lee, which enabled his men to beat back a force 10 times their number. In the end, the position proved too strong for Sherman's men to take. Writing to his wife after the battle, Sherman bluntly said, "We have been to Vicksburg, and it was too much for us." As the fleet limps back to the Mississippi, they meet an unexpected person, a steaming General McClernand, who, once he got his orders to move, chased after Sherman's fleet as it sailed south from Memphis. Once the two generals meet, Sherman learns that Grant has also been forced back. Seeing how demoralized the men are after the rough handling at Chickasaw Bayou, McClernand wants to restore their confidence before they make another attempt against Vicksburg. So, on January 3, 1863, McClernand orders a rapid attack upon the small rebel garrison at Arkansas Post. The riverine fleet, now under the command of McClernand, steams up the Arkansas River and attacks Fort Hyman at the Battle of Arkansas Post on January 9th. In this quick, successful fight, the Federals capture the entire garrison, over 5,000 men. Jubilant in their success, McClernand wants to push upriver and capture Little Rock, but is quickly recalled by his superior. Grant, annoyed to hear that McClernand has finally taken command of the expedition, decides to bring the entire fleet back to Memphis to refit. Though forced to recall his men at the turn of the new year, Grant is not done in his attempt to take the stubborn river city. Despite the devastating Holly Springs raid and Sherman's bloody repulse at Chickasaw Bayou, Grant realizes the immense challenge that taking Vicksburg has become. With his army reformed and refitted, Grant will try to dig his way to Vicksburg without having to rely upon the Mississippi to approach the city. In the upcoming months, Grant will employ his soldiers in digging canals, cutting down trees, and muscling the heavy steamers through the untamed swamps of Mississippi, all in the hopes of reaching a city that has, for over a year, resisted every attempt to be captured.